World leaders say Russia's war in Ukraine could lead to a new crisis, food insecurity. Both Russia and Ukraine are major suppliers of staples like wheat, and the conflict is impacting exports. President Volodymyr Zelensky appealed for more military assistance to avoid a global food crisis, saying he needs help unblocking export routes. Leaders met at the United Nations this past week to discuss what could be done, and earlier I spoke with Canada's ambassador to the UN, Bob Rae, who was at those meetings.
I think we have to sort of think about tipping points and other issues. Obviously, climate change has dramatically affected the growing periods and how much people are able to provide for their own needs. COVID has affected supply chains dramatically. But then this additional factor, this is why we call it the perfect storm or a terrible storm, that the closure of the ports, the impact on agriculture in Ukraine and in Russia has created an enormous problem.
Right now, we're in a crisis in America as it relates to farmers. We're facing an all-time high in diesel fuel. Here in Virginia, I'm paying $5.63 a gallon for diesel fuel. We're at an all-time high for fertilizer. I'm paying $900 a ton. People, that's $900 a ton for fertilizer, a $25,000 fertilizer bill that we're looking at right now. Now is the time for America to come together and support America's farmers. We just provided relief for Ukraine, where we're going to be looking at some losses there in the form of wheat and other commodities, but we just provided Ukraine with $40 billion in aid, and nothing in that spending package for America's farmers. I know Chairman Scott was trying to work across some lines and get some things done. America has to come back together and work together by the same seam that is divided right now. We're divided here in our country on race. We're divided on bitterness and hatred. But, you know, love is always greater than hate. We got to find a way to work together so that we can get something done. In this
John,
instance, for America's farmers.
This is where maybe we part ways politically, and there's no hate in my voice here. There's frustration that I'm feeling. I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated that 2/3 of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, and I believe that's unnecessary. Right. I believe giving up American energy independence was one of the dumbest things this country's ever done. Begging OPEC, begging Iran, begging Venezuela, that doesn't make sense to me. Maybe you agree with that. I don't. Fixing the supply chain and making sure that we have the fertilizer for hardworking farmers like you is unconscionable to me. You feed the entire country.
I now give the floor to the Secretary General, His Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres.
Madam President, Excellencies, thank you for this opportunity to brief you on the links between conflict and hunger, an urgent and important issue. And today I have one simple message. If you don't feed people, you feed conflict. Conflict drives hunger and famine drive conflict. When a country or region is gripped by conflict and hunger, they become mutually reinforcing. They cannot be resolved separately. Hunger and poverty combined with inequality, climate shocks, sectarian and ethnic tension, grievances over land and resources to spark and drive conflict. At the same time, conflict forces people to leave their homes, land and jobs, disrupts agriculture and trade, reduces access to vital resources like water and electricity, and so drives hunger.
The war in Ukraine is now leading to another growing crisis, hunger, a pain that could be widespread beyond just Europe. Russian troops are blocking Ukraine's ports, preventing the distribution of food, a lifeline to other countries. Intense international diplomatic efforts are now happening to end the blockage. But in the meantime, farmers are bearing the brunt of this aspect of the conflict. ABC's Tom Soufi Burrage takes us to the front lines with rare access into a stalled grain port.
The war in Ukraine has a second front. Ukrainian farms normally feeding millions abroad, their produce stuck.
it's just a disaster. And I mean, especially for the coming year, you know, if we don't open the ports soon, our crops out here, we can't export them.
Russia threatening Ukraine's coastline, so vital food exports in Ukrainian ports going nowhere, causing hunger in some of the poorest parts of the world.
The Ukraine war has just overnight basically taken the fifth biggest player off the market.
World leaders trying to broker a deal. The Pope speaking out, saying hunger should not be used as a weapon of war. Ukraine is a giant agricultural production house. Ukrainian food exports normally feeding 400 million people around the world each year, according to the UN. We're talking about everyday products. Ukraine produces almost half of global exports of sunflower oil. Barley, corn and wheat, big numbers too.
So it's a very substantial loss that currently there are no exports coming out of Ukraine. And it comes in a situation when prices were already increasing.
And joining us now is our correspondent in Tehran, Reza Sayah. Reza, what can you tell us about these protests?
When you have protests like this in Iran, it's oftentimes very difficult, sometimes impossible to verify exactly how big they are, how widespread they are, and exactly where they are, especially when they're outside of Tehran, because we simply don't have access to these locations and we can't independently verify what's happening. However, with the limited information we have, let's tell you what we do know. Over the past 24 hours, we've seen an increasing number of video clips posted online, posted on social media, showing demonstrations and protests in at least two southern cities in the southern province of Khuzestan. In these protests, you see demonstrators sometimes chanting anti-government slogans against current Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi. Sometimes the protests are turning violent. When you look at these video clips, you see rioters burning tires and security forces responding by firing tear gas in an effort to disperse the demonstrators. Very limited reporting by Iran state media. One of the few reports we saw earlier today said that 22 demonstrators have been arrested. Why are people angry? Because of sudden price hikes when it comes to basic food items. The government announcing price hikes with 4 basic food items, including cooking oil, eggs, chicken, and milk. Other food items, including sandwich bread, pasta, flour, they've gone up as well. And the reason for these sudden price hikes are twofold. On one hand, these price hikes are part of Iran's efforts to reform the economy, to get rid of very costly subsidies. The other reason is the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Both Russia and Ukraine, major suppliers of food to Iran. Russia supplies at least half of Iran's wheat supply. Ukraine supplying Iran with a lot of cooking oil. Obviously, the conflict there disrupting some of those supplies, and that too has led to some of these sudden price hikes.